This is TWiT.
All right. Paul said it was going to be weird. Let's see if
you just saw
It's
it by the
either
name.
like
It's just
familiar or huh? You know?
what? It's either a product you've already heard of or you've never heard of it. So, and this is a byproduct of me going and visiting friends in the Netherlands. And every time I've gotten a weird whiskey or two from them. But this is taking it up another notch because I've had to dig deeper into this. Again, I thought I knew my way around whiskey before I started hanging out with you guys all the time. And now it's really, my mind keeps changing.
I'm not accepting the blame for this. I'm sorry.
Deeper and deeper and deeper into this rabbit hole.
Well, first thing you're going to have to tell me is what this means.
This means, are you 18?
Bevestig geliefd,
Click on the black box. Even when you're on the English site, it still pops up the Dutch "Are you 18?"
I love it.
thing. So this is Cley whiskey, and this is one of these modern micro distilleries, founded only in 2015 in Rotterdam, which is one of the largest city in the Netherlands. It's where the big ports are, right? And the old joke in the Netherlands is that Rotterdam makes the money and The Hague spends it on Amsterdam. Like those are the three big cities. The founders, Paul den Dulk and Maria Neves, they named it after the road that they built the facility on, called Cley Road, which was first marked on a map in 1611. So, before all the colonies were doing much anything, there was Cley Road. And
when roads
Cley
really were made of clay.
Yeah, true enough. Paul's education in distilling actually comes from Genever. Genever is a Dutch alcohol, regional. Well, it's not really Dutch. It's regional to the northwestern Europe. So that's Netherlands, Belgium, parts of western parts of Germany, northern parts of France. Going back to the 1200s, it's a very old school drink, but it is a juniper spirit. So before gin, there was Genever. And by the way, if you ever fly in the business or first class seats of KLM, they'll give you a little house made of ceramic.
I have a whole row of them on my kitchen couch.
And they are filled with Genever.
Really?
Yes, that's what that liquid is.
I was wondering what was in there. I knew it was something
there. I have lost a couple of weekends to the stuff. I do not recommend it. It is
what
bad.
does it taste like?
It's basically gin. It's
Okay.
a simplified gin. It's made with alembic stills, the old school still. And in fact, the school where Paul was educated, he purchased one of their alembic stills, and that's what Cley whiskey uses. They make a gin as well as a set of whiskey. And when I say micro distillery, I'm not kidding. This place makes 10,000 liters of alcohol a year. So somewhere between 15,000 and 20,000 bottles total. Right? And in the 2015 is not an accident, because in 2014 is when the Netherlands passed laws for micro distilleries where they reduced the taxation rate of the alcohol when you're under a certain level of production. As you get bigger, then you pay more tax per liter. This is very similar to what I described when we were talking about the Laird of Fintry out of the Okanagan, where British Columbia has the same microdistilling rules. So what's made this expansion of distilling in small scale grow so much has been that we found ways to allow these companies to stay small, to be profitable, to not have to grow to big factories with 24-hour-a-day shifts to be able to make enough margin to function. It looks like Cley whiskey is succeeding on 10,000 liters per year. And so they have a lot of some advantages in the size of things. You're talking about a small operation. Realistically, they're selling this bottle of whiskey for 70 euros, maybe $80. And they're probably keeping a fair portion of that because they do a minimal amount of marketing. We'll get further into that. So you're still talking about a total budget of $250,000, maybe $500,000 a year, all up. Less cost of goods. Like can't be more than 3 or 4 people running the whole place. Like that's what it takes to make this work. This particular edition, I had a chance to taste at my friend's place where I was before we went to Copenhagen, visiting with his little baby. And so he pulled this out and I took a taste and I took some pictures and did some research. The name Palo Cortado is actually a type of sherry. And I can't believe we're talking about sherry again. To the point where it's like, it's time for me to finish reading all the specs on sherry because I'm learning more and more about it. Because each time we go down this path, you got to understand what's the heck's a Palo Cortado versus the other kinds of sherry. So this particular edition of their whiskey, which they don't have any more of, so you have to go find a bottle at a specialty shop, spent 3 years in bourbon casks, super normal for whiskey, right? Made in Europe, an expensive way to get your 3 years in. Barrels don't cost too much. And then 1.5 years in a Palo Cortado octave cask. An octave cask is a really small cask. It's 64 liters, or about 17 gallons, as opposed to a normal American bourbon cask, which is 200 liters or 53 gallons. Although if you're in Scotland, they always remake them as hogsheads, right? They get 5 bourbon casks together and they make 4 hogsheads, which are 250 liters or about 66 gallons each. I presume that is what Cley Whiskey did with this, is that they remade them into the 250s. They did their 3 years. And considering how small a batch you're, maybe only 1 or 2 barrels, right? Like this is very small batch production. And after the 3 years, they do this 1.5 years in an octave cask, these tiny little casks. And 1.5 years in a cask that small is a long time, because the contact level for the spirit is really high when you're down to a cask that small. So the flavor on it is astonishing for something that's only 4.5 years old, and you never see appellations on any of these micro distilleries. It's got big, rich flavors. Now, I'd be remiss if I don't explain what a Palo Cortado is, because it's a very unusual type of sherry. And I mentioned sherry briefly when we were talking about last week's the Moscard Muscatel, which is another sherry finished small distillery whiskey. The most common type of sherry, like 90% of it, is called Fino. It's made from the Palomino grape. It's a fortified wine, so they add about 15%. They raise the alcohol using grape spirit up to about 15%, and they put it in barrels. And remember, they stack the barrels, so the oldest ones are at the bottom and the newer ones are higher up, and you take about a third out. Year over year, typically 3 years old. Well, I did talk about this at the time because it seems crazy, and I want to dig further into it. Maybe I'll have to just do a whole sherry piece, because in the Finos specifically, because they only fortify up to 15%. As the sherry sits in the barrel, it grows a layer of yeast they call flor. And this layer of yeast actually stops the sherry from oxidizing. So it keeps its color, kind of protects it when it ages. And then in the second year, they move a third of it down a barrel, and they move a third of it down a barrel, until finally after 3 years, you're taking a third of it out to put into bottles. But a small percentage time that doesn't happen. Well, what really happens is it really depends on the flavors. And this is where even the name Palo Cortado comes from. So when they initially make up the sherry, they taste it as they're putting it in the barrel. And the overseers, these barrelmen, mark it. If they're happy with the flavor, if it's coming out really nice, they'll put a single stroke on it, which that means it's going to be a Fino, which is this kind where they're going to leave a certain amount of room. It's going to grow the flor. It's going to last us 3 years, and they're going to serve it. If it's stronger flavored, they'll make it into an Oloroso sherry. So now it's marked differently. There's a stroke and a dot, and they actually raise the alcohol level to put up to 17 or 18%, because they don't want it to spoil. At 14% or 15%, it can actually go off. And so if they raise the alcohol level higher, it kills all the bacteria, and so it's safe. Then they have a whole procedure for, if they're not sure how the barrel's going, they'll actually put 2 marks on it, which means go back and check it again. And then if they get bad, right? If they're not good ones, they'll put 3 marks on it. That means this goes to the vinegar makers, or it'll be distilled into a kind of brandy. Like, there's other outcomes for it. But a Palo Cortado means a cross stroke. So what's actually happened is that some point in that first year or so, typically, the flor dies and disappears. And now it's oxidizing. And so they'll cross the single stroke, because they thought it was going to be a Fino. And they raise the alcohol level up to 17%, protect it. And it makes this kind of mixture of the gentle aging of the Fino with the Oloroso aging as it finishes. And that's Palo Cortado. Wow. I've never had a Palo Cortado. Now I want one, now that I've seen how crazy this is. But this is the particular kinds of barrels that the Cley Whiskey folks laid their hands on to make this edition only. And the reason you can't see it on the retails is that they sold it almost entirely through whiskey clubs.
Oh.
Now, I'm seeing this more and more, and I'm realizing it's a whole other business model. You've got your discount on your taxes for being a micro distillery. You're trying to do direct sales on the web, which is its own challenge, but you got to move enough units, right? And if you're a big distillery, of course, you're doing big scale marketing and you're doing all your branding exercises and so forth. But more and more, I saw this with Ballandalloch, and I've seen it with the Mossgard as well. They're working closely with these whiskey clubs across Europe and essentially making a special editions for the club only. And some of these whiskey clubs, these little shops, are selling 100 bottles. Like, they have a serious loyal membership. And when they like a bottle, they're going to be able to give it to a whole bunch of their members. And if you're only making 15,000 bottles a year, and you can sell 100 to one club, like, you don't need that many clubs before. That's your whole business. And it to me, it's fascinating because now the retail relationship is very personal. You're not necessarily driving on the brand so much as you're one of the brands. You now have a relationship with maybe 100 people, right? The ones that run these powerful clubs, these successful clubs, that then they have 100 or so key customers, and boom, you're at 10,000 bottles. Like, you're good. You've got a working business at that scale. And all of this is by way to say that my friend is realizing that his favorite whiskey club, the guy who's running it's in his 70s, is ready to retire, and he may take it over, and I might be investing in a whiskey club. Because
hey, good idea.
No, it's not a good idea. It doesn't mean I'm not going to do it. It's just that,
I like it. I like it for you. I like it for you.
But I love this change in business model, right? This opportunity to have these small units, that this is a successful business. And then they have this supply chain that's very personal, that's very individualized. And it only makes sense at the small scale. And these are not businesses trying to grow to become owned by Diageo. These are businesses that are happy making the product they're making, experiment in the ways they want. And when they make a batch they really like, they can tell because their clubs buy it all. And that's it. They don't do any more marketing than that.
Do you think small scale in general is better than big scale production?
When you get bigger, it's easier to get lost.
Right.
My concern with a place like Cley Whisky is they only have to make a couple of bad batches that the clubs don't want to buy.
Then they're in trouble. Yeah.
Right. And you can already see if you poke through that website, they got about 4 or 5 editions of whiskey running right now. So, and some of those are going to be more popular than others, but that helps them target in on what their real customers want. And you're only talking about 10,000 customers. Right? Like, it's not an outrageous number, and they're not trying to directly control them. They're connecting with different clubs. Now you get a couple of 100 clubs going, and you can mix and match, and they're going to have different flavor profiles. You notice that they have a peated, so they're playing with some other flavors in there as well. This particular edition ran about €70 when it was available, and there's still a few bottles out there. I found a couple, so $80 US. It's cask strength, so 51% is really what it came out after those years. It was hand numbered. I have the photograph of it. It was bottle 97 of the batch. And it was only a 500 centiliter bottle, or a 50 centiliter bottle, or 500 milliliter bottle. So as opposed to a normal 750. So that's what.
Yeah, they look kind of cute. Yeah.
18 ounces. Like, it's a little small.
So I think you have a marvelous opportunity if you did a whiskey club, Richard.
Yep.
You would sell. I mean, just you run this show alone.
Yeah, the challenge here is shipping. Where can you actually deliver to? So one of the upsides to being in the EU is the rules are pretty straightforward for moving whiskey around in that area.
The rules of the U.S. are convoluted.
Yeah, every state's different.
Yeah. The phrase you're thinking is interstate commerce.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same problem in Canada with interprovincial commerce.
Mm-hmm.
It is difficult. And that would end up being your whole business is what does it take to deliver?
I think you have to go to everybody's house.
Well, there's that, or it's just the club. So do you figure out where your clubs are and where it works? So this may only work in Northwestern Europe. I hope that's not true, but it is an interesting part about, spirits have been tightly controlled for a very long time. And it's very tough to ship between entities for spirits because they all have their own rules. Like, you cannot sell a 60% ABV alcohol in Norway, full stop. Like, you can't. It's a law against the law. They set a law ages ago. It's kind of a silly law today, but it's still there. And so when we went and got a bunch of Abeler Abunda, which can run anywhere between 57 and 62, they literally have to sort the cases out to stay under 60 to sell in Norway.
Wow.
Right? It's that kind of thing. So yeah, rule to rule, these things are hard.
Well, it takes the fun out of getting drunk.
You know,
It's the whiskey version of binning.
Yeah. It's binned. It's binned.
We're going to add some water to it so we can sell it in Norway.
But yeah, I'm getting pulled into the business models now and how these micro distilleries are starting to work.
That's too bad because I mean, you have this perfect bully pulpit for a whiskey club.
If
you
I
could call it whiskey, Richard Campbell's Whiskey Club.
Yeah,
and I think everybody listening would join it.
It's just a question of how to sell it, but provide it to people. But if,
Richard,
is that why
in the pocket of big whiskey?
But now I understand why the whiskey advent calendar you very kindly gave us last year, it can't really be branded because they have to figure out how to get around shipping it to all these different states. And,
yes. Well, and literally it was only available in certain places because folks have only gone so far. And I hate you want to learn to hate your business in a big hurry. What if the secret sauce of your business is, shipping rolls? Like that is sad.
That's a logistics business, not a whiskey business.
I think that's not what people want to do. But that's where I think these clubs may be a proxy for a bunch of those problems. So
you're in a good business for what you do, which is explain how all this stuff works and talk about it. And we're so glad you're here. Richard Campbell, runasradio.com. That's where his podcasts are, both .NET Rocks and Run as Radio. And he is home for the nonce. But his
Vegas next week.
His tribulations and trials begin next week. Thank you, Richard.
We'll be back.